Today, we are having a look at the phrasal verb teem with. Yes, that is really how you spell it. I have not made a mistake. Then we're going to have a look at 7 more phrasal verbs that I use all the time, so you really should know them. And if you've been following my Level Up with Photos video series, you will really like the end of this video where I take a look at 4 example sentences and analyze the grammar. Lots to do. Let's go. So you probably already know that spelling and pronunciation do not always go hand in hand when it comes to English. So we are looking at the long E vowel sound. So team and team sound exactly the same, but of course their meanings differ. Now, I'm sure lots of you just want to get immediately to the meaning of a word, but it's really important to focus on what part of speech it is. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? It's really going to affect how you use it in sentences. So I've already told you that today we are focusing on a phrasal verb, which is a verb that has a particle. Kind of looks like a preposition that is connected to it. And phrasal verbs can have a dramatically different meaning from their main verb, or they can have a slightly different meaning. So I've got a challenge for you. How many phrasal verbs do you already know? Set a timer for 60 seconds and write down as many as you can. I'll see you in a minute. I hope you got a few phrasal verbs, and now let's take a look at the first ones that came to my mind. The first one was to give in, meaning to surrender. After arguing for hours over where to go on our summer vacation, I finally gave in and agreed to go camping. So I just didn't want to argue anymore. Okay, fine, let's go camping. I surrendered. To call off. This just means to cancel something. So my boss called off our team building event due to a scheduling conflict. Now, if you take a look in a dictionary, it will tell you that this is a separable phrasal verb, meaning you can separate or split it and put a noun in the middle. So you can call something off. My boss called off the event. My boss called the event off. Both of them are great. But you've got to be really careful when you decide to use a pronoun instead of the noun. So he, she, it. So what happens? My boss called off it. No, you cannot put a pronoun at the end. My boss called it off. Okay, sure, you can put it in the middle. So if you're using an actual noun, you're safe. It can go anywhere. If you're using a pronoun, it cannot go at the end. To take off. Now, if you are a traveler, then you've probably used this to talk about planes. Amazingly, our flight actually took off on time. But we can also use this to talk about people because it just means to leave. So I can come to your party on Saturday, but I'll have to take off around 9 p.m. because I've got an early tennis lesson on Sunday morning. But what about take off? Can you separate that? Take something off. That sounds right. But what does it mean? I'm feeling really hot. I shouldn't have worn such a heavy jacket. Let me take it off. Now, I'm not saying I want my jacket to leave, but I am saying that I need to remove my jacket. So, take off means leave. Take something off means remove. This is why phrasal verbs are so confusing. Now, to get by has the idea of survive. To survive. We often use this in a casual sense. How's Susan doing since her breakup? Oh, she's getting by. Meaning She's not doing very well. She's quite sad. She's upset about the breakup, but she is surviving. And we often use this in the financial sense as well. So you might say, my company has cut my hours again and they refuse to consider a pay rise. I don't know how I'm going to get by next month. Meaning, how am I going to survive financially? How am I going to pay my bills and cover my expenses? To run into is another phrasal verb that can be used in different contexts and has a slightly different meaning. So you could use it in the literal, physical sense of I am running down the street and I hit a person. I wasn't looking where I was going, obviously. Or maybe if you're driving, you could say, my son borrowed my car and ran into a tree. Fortunately, he's okay, but it's going to cost a fortune to get the car repaired. Or in a different context, you could use it to say that you meet someone accidentally. So you didn't have any arrangement to see that person, but you were out and about and you saw them. For example, I ran into my old history professor at the supermarket the other day. So, same phrasal verb, but in different contexts, it has totally different meanings. English is so much fun. The next one is to bring up. To bring up. Any idea what this means? You could bring something up in conversation, meaning that you start talking about it. British people always bring up the weather at the start of any conversation. It's true. I do it all the time. Or you could bring someone up, meaning to raise children. So Susan is bringing up her children to be respectful of other cultures. To pass out. This is another interesting one with completely different meanings. So if I say, the teacher will pass out the tests at 9 a.m. So please make sure you are seated in the examination hall by 8:55. Now, this is a transitive verb, meaning it's taking an object. And in this case, it means to distribute, to hand out or to pass out, to distribute to lots of different people. But as an intransitive verb, a verb that doesn't have an object, this has a totally different meaning. So to pass out could mean to faint or to lose consciousness. For example, Bob passed out after running 10 kilometers in plus 35-degree heat. Or Mark passed out after drinking an entire bottle of whiskey. Or Ryan always passes out at the sight of blood. So, same phrasal verb, very different contexts and meanings. I'm curious what phrasal verbs came to your mind, so put them in the comments below. Let me know. Now, getting back to our phrasal verb of today, team with. What does it mean? Well, it means that there are lots of things in one specific place. And we usually use this to talk about people or animals. Not always, but usually. And it's definitely something that is in motion, that's moving, that's evolving. For example, the mall is teeming with shoppers, normally around the Christmas holidays. The roads are teeming with cars, generally during rush hour in the morning and in the afternoon. And my mind is teeming with ideas. Okay, that's not a person or an animal, but they're definitely in motion. I'm sure you have your favorite dictionary or dictionary website. It's always a good idea to take a look at a couple of different sites because one definition might just be a little bit easier for you to catch the meaning of than another. In this case, they're all very similar. As usual, there are lots of different ways to express this idea. For example, the shopping centers are full of people during the run-up to Christmas. The rivers and lakes used to be alive with fish. The toy store was overrun with parents looking for this year's must-have toy. The side entrance of the stadium was swarming with fans waiting for the players to leave. The construction crew quickly realized the timber was riddled with termites. English has lots of synonyms with generally the same meaning, but the tone of the words can be different. This is called connotation. And yes, I am going to make another video all about connotation. Just wait for it. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Now, one aspect of connotation is whether the word conveys a positive meaning, a neutral meaning, or a negative meaning. So consider the examples that I just gave you and try and decide whether you think the meaning is positive, neutral, or negative. Pause and think. Connotation can be really tricky, especially when you're trying to determine if a word is positive or negative. If you don't know, you don't know. So it is really important to consider the whole context of what you're reading or what you're listening to, and that's going to help you determine whether it's positive or negative. Now, in this first one, to be full of something, this is a little bit flexible because it really depends what that something is. If you have an essay that is full of mistakes, that's a negative. But if you have a bag full of presents, who doesn't love presents? That's a positive. What about the next one? To be alive with something. I mean, being alive, it's quite a good thing. So in this case, it is going to have a positive connotation. As soon as I hear to be alive with, I know that something positive is coming. But the next ones, to be overrun, to be swarming, to be riddled, all of these have a negative connotation, either because I don't want whatever that object is. Termites. Nobody wants termites in the woodwork of their house. Or it might be because the number is just too great. So having a couple of fans waiting for you when you come out of the stadium is great, but being swarmed by fans, no. The shop might want quite a few customers, but to be overrun with customers, that means they don't have sufficient staff to be able to deal with the numbers of customers. So it turns into a negative. And I know that because of the term overrun, swarming, riddled. So it is another thing that you need to take into consideration when you're studying a new word. Go and look at what that connotation is, because if you use it in the wrong context, it could be really misleading or confusing for your listener or your reader. Imagine if you're talking about your garden and you say, oh, my garden is overrun with flowers. Now, normally people want flowers in their garden, so I'm a little bit confused. I'm probably going to assume that you suffer from hay fever, you're allergic to the pollen in flowers, and for you, the flowers are a very negative thing. But if you said that your garden is alive with flowers, now I immediately think, oh, you're describing a beautiful garden. To be safe, you could just say, my garden is full of flowers. So it could be positive, it could be negative. It's a nice neutral term to use. Think about it. Now, if you've seen my other vocabulary videos, you'll know that I refer to register as being the degree of formality that a word has. You do need to take this into consideration because The words that you use with your boss and the words that you use with your best friend are probably going to be different. Now, in this case, it's a phrasal verb, and phrasal verbs are usually considered to be a little bit less formal. But that's not to say that you cannot use them in a professional context. Of course you can, and a lot of people do. In fact, there are many phrasal verbs that have originated from the business world. Take a look at the alternatives. So you could say that the mall is teeming with shoppers, or shoppers abound in the mall. Now, personally, I would not use abound. I think it's a little bit too formal and quite old-fashioned. But interestingly, the noun abundance, yeah, that's quite commonly used. So I would definitely say, oh, there's an abundance of shoppers in the mall. So consider the register. Does it fit the situation and your speaking style? So to review, team with. This is an informal phrasal verb that has a neutral connotation, and it's used to express large numbers of people or things moving around. Now we need to look at some examples. So whenever you look at examples, you really should be paying attention to the patterns of words that are used, because these are, of course, collocations. You might not notice them at the beginning, they might not register as a collocation, but the more you see the same combination, well, your brain is eventually going to realize, I've seen the same combination 10 times. It must be quite popular. Aha, that's a collocation. Remember, collocations don't have a grammatical rule behind them. It's just what is commonly paired together. So with team with, we can use both countable nouns and uncountable nouns. We've already seen things like team with people, team with cars, team with ideas, but we could use the uncountable version as well. Team with life, team with traffic. So let's take a look at some examples. See if you can spot any collocations. So we said that team with is a phrasal verb, and phrasal verbs are generally considered to be more informal. But take a look at some of these big publications that are using team with in their headlines. We've got The Guardian, Science News, Gulf News, the European Space Agency, the Royal Gazette. Lots of good examples of language can be found in newspaper headlines. You don't even need to take the time and read the whole article, unless it catches your eye and you're interested, of course. If you want to get a little bit of extra pronunciation practice and focus on intonation, chunking, stress, make sure that you pause after each sentence and practice repeating it. So let's start with the first example. His mind has been teeming with creative ideas ever since he was notified of the project requirements. Number 2. The train station had been teeming with people only moments before the last train departed. Number 3. The classroom will hopefully be teeming with activity tomorrow as students work on their group projects. And the last one. The annual dragon boat race usually draws a big crowd. As long as the weather holds out, the riverbanks are expected to teem with spectators from all over the country. Great. Now let's have a look at the grammar in each of these example sentences. Let's start off with example number 1 and take a look at the grammar. His mind has been teeming with creative ideas ever since he was notified of the project requirements. Now, We have got a great example of the present perfect tense here because something started in the past and it's still happening now. There's also a lot of emphasis in this sentence. Ever since indicates the start time. I could have said since, but ever since is more emphatic, meaning there has not been a break in the ideas. Now, I'm also using the present perfect continuous for the same idea of emphasis. So, the ideas have been coming to him, the ideas have been circling around in his mind constantly ever since that start time when he was informed of what the project would entail. Now, I always like passive voice because it brings a little bit of interest to your sentence structure and it shifts the focus from the agent, the doer of the action, to the recipient. So here we've got that start time. The start time has to be in the past. So we're using passive voice in the past. He was notified. I don't know who notified him. I assume it was his boss, his line manager, his team leader. But in this case, it's not important who notified him. Just the fact that that notification was the starting point of all of those creative ideas coming to him. Prepositions. You guys know that I love prepositions because they are something you really need to be careful of. They can be flexible, but that means that you're probably changing the meaning. So here, he was notified of something. It's the topic that's coming. So he was notified of the project requirements. But if we change the preposition and say he was notified by, well, now I would expect to hear the method by email, by text message. Okay, let's take a look now at example number 2. The train station had been teeming with people only moments before the last train departed. So it's quite clear here that we have got two actions. Lots of people walking around and a train leaving. Those are our two actions. So which action happened first? Well, there are a couple of different things that we can look at to identify this. First of all, we can have a look at the time clause. Before. One thing happened before another thing. And there's a lot of emphasis in today's examples because instead of just saying before, I've said only moments before. So I'm emphasizing that very short duration of time. Now, one thing happens before another thing. So that's telling me that had been teeming is the first action and departed was the second action. But I already knew that because the past perfect tense, that is what it's used for, to indicate the first action in the past. And I use the continuous here because I want to emphasize that those people had been walking around, talking, waiting for the train for quite a while before it actually left. So then we've got that past simple. You might think of this as quite a boring tense, but actually it is our most commonly used tense when we're telling stories. So it's giving us a reference point for the past perfect to make it really clear that these two actions were working together. Okay, lots of exciting things happening in example number 3. The classroom will hopefully be teeming with activity tomorrow as students work on their group projects. So now we've got a different verb tense. We're looking at the future. and I've got something will be happening in the future. So this is saying that I've got a specific time and I know that it's going to be happening at that time. And I know that it's going to be a temporary action. So it's only going to be happening at that specific time. So how do we know time? Well, expressing time is done in lots of different ways. And here I'm using as. Now, as can be a little bit tricky. We sometimes use it for comparisons, as hot as cold as. It can also mean because, so you're introducing the reason for something, or it can mean during. So in this sentence, we're indicating that specific point at which the classroom is expected to be busy, teeming with activity. Now, I would like to say it's guaranteed, but in this case, we're saying it will hopefully be teeming with activity. So we've got a nice adverb there that is modifying the verb. Let's take a quick look at some of the vocabulary because if you've noticed, I did not use the normal regular verb work. I've actually used a phrasal verb to work on something. So what's the difference? Well, when you work, you're doing an activity that requires effort. Usually you're getting paid for it. But when you work on something, this means that you're spending your time, your effort, repairing or improving something. So you would not say, I'm going to work my English, but you're going to work on your English. You've already got a good base in English, but you want to improve your level. So in this case, the group projects have already been started, but it's a continuing work in progress. They're getting better. They're being improved by the students. Okay, let's take a look at the last example for today. The annual dragon boat race usually draws a big crowd. As long as the weather holds out, the riverbanks are expected to teem with spectators from all over the country. Let's take a look first at the vocabulary. In that first sentence, the race usually draws a big crowd. This is a really nice term to use. We're using it as a synonym for attracts. And at the end, we're talking about what is being attracted. Well, spectators. Spectators from all over the country are being attracted to this event and they are expected to line the river and watch this boat race. So this is quite a nice collocation to talk about spectators in relation to sports. You'll see I've highlighted quite a lot in the second sentence because there's a lot going on. So it starts off with as long as the weather holds out. Now, as long as. This could be confused for a comparative, as cold as long as, but in this case, it's actually indicating a conditional. So until the point that the weather stops holding out. Okay, but what does that mean? Hold out. This is a phrasal verb and it just means to continue to be sufficient, to continue to be good. We want things to hold out for as long as possible. Oh, I hope my washing machine holds out for a couple more years because I don't really have the budget to replace it right now. Another nice thing in the sentence is, of course, team with, but I'm using it in the future. So something is expected to happen in the future. That is our fixed verb pattern that we're going to use.
So if the weather continues to be good and it doesn't start to rain, then the riverbanks are expected to teem with spectators. So I'm not saying who is expecting this, it is passive voice. But the expectation is now for what is going to happen in the future. So I know this dragon boat race
I know
has
that
not
vocabulary can
happened
be really
yet.
overwhelming just because there is so much of it. And phrasal verbs can be annoying because their meaning can change quite drastically from the main verb to the phrasal verb. And not a lot of people like analyzing grammar in sentences like I do. So if you have watched this entire video and found it useful, I'm so happy. Please like and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future vocabulary videos like this. If you haven't seen my other videos, go and check them out, and I'll see you next time. Bye.